Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of the San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin, lifelong journalist. I've produced stories for ABC News, CBS News, and CNN. I love meeting interesting people. I love having thought-provoking conversations, and that's exactly what we do here at this podcast series. And that is thanks to my co-host, the author David Parker, who is author of Income and Wealth, a San Francisco Conservative, and the forthcoming book of essays, Rome 476. So I encourage you to check all of them out. David, how are you today?
I'm fine. I'm writing away like crazy. I'm fine.
Excellent. Well, I love your books, and having mentioned the titles of three of them, that leads me to a topic I'd love to discuss with you today on this episode, and that is the great books. I know that you know, one of the great qualities I love about your books, not only because you're a hardworking entrepreneur in the trenches, as I like to say, in the real estate field there in San Francisco. So you give a very different perspective from academics who are not out there in the trenches, but you certainly provide a great historical context for issues that are still so relevant for us today. And I think we can all benefit from a foundation of familiarity with the great books. And I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Up until relatively recently, the 1960s activism and 1970s activism, where all of a sudden American public schools were becoming a multicultural place. It's called postmodernism. We've moved on from what has made this nation great. What people studied, what united this nation was the history and culture of British and American democracy, which has great and deep roots. When I said my third book coming out is Rome 476, I can't believe almost everybody says, what does that mean? Where did you get that title from? And that was really disheartening when I hear that, because that's the fall of Rome. That's something you would study. Everybody who studies classics in Rome, in Europe, and probably anywhere else in the world knows that date. It's like 1492, Columbus came. 1776, we have a U.S. Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Not Constitution, Revolutionary War. How can people not know that date? If you read, it's in a sense, we're living at a very low civilizational point. The conversation among citizens today is nothing compared to conversation among citizens in 5th century Athens, probably the highest point in human civilization, or 1st century Rome, and then again the Age of Enlightenment, especially in America, England, Scotland, and France. The level of conversation among citizens at cafes or anywhere in schools was just much, much higher. We have science and technology. We know about the messenger RNA. Fine, but that's not philosophy. And the founding fathers read Pericles' funeral oration. It's in Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War. Anybody today reading that, like all students did in the past, especially in Jesuit schools where they really forced a classic, it'll make you cry. It's what the founding father says. That's us. That's what we want for America. Even if you disagree, all Americans should at least read that 1 page or 2 or 3 page funeral oration that's still world famous. That's who we are. They said, we're a free nation. Our enemies are walking among us. We don't care. What can they do? We fought the battle at the plain of Marathon. We were fighting for Western civilization. We were fighting for the rights of the individual, human rights. The Persians, they were fighting for conquest. They told the soldiers, if you win, you can just go rob and take whatever you want, rape whoever you want. We're not fighting for that. We're fighting for individual human dignity and for thought and discussion and for universities. Well, that's inspiring to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But just to play devil's advocate, if that's the right expression, there might be some people out there who saying, I hear what you're saying, but how is it really relevant to us today? I mean, I know, it is relevant. I know it's relevant, but how do you persuade those people? And when did the lights go on for you that this is really relevant? And I get the sense, again, when you went back to school to study politics and economics and history, that I get the impression that the more you learned and studied, the more you wanted to study, that one book led to another and so on. But I'd love to hear how you respond to those people who just don't seem to get it. And also what that experience was like for you when you first got excited about all this.
Well, I'm fortunate to have had what's called the Great Books education, known from the University of Chicago. They would require students to read that. And I had that and I remember reading Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle is Plato's student. And they're arguing the same thing we're arguing. Plato says we should have a government of the most intelligent, most qualified people. That's Woodrow Wilson and that's Franklin Roosevelt. And Aristotle says, no, I'm a Jeffersonian, without knowing. Says, no, every citizen has a vote. Let them vote for their government. We don't assign a government. That's very close to dictatorship. But the level of the discussion is so high, it makes you stop in your tracks. And the way they talk is just like we talk. And what they're talking about is what we're talking about. And that's 2,500 years ago. We should read that. That'll help us in our discussions. Same thing, same kind of people at a higher level. And Rome, first century Rome, not all of Rome, was a next civilizational high point. And modern government comes out of that. Cicero says we should have 3 branches of government. And within the legislature, we should have like a Senate and a House of Representatives like we have. The Senate should be people who have been very successful in business, who are employing almost everybody. They should have a voice because they're outstanding. In theory, they're outstanding people. And the House of Representatives should represent everybody. The poorest person, the least fortunate, should be represented also in Congress. And then there should be a judiciary to say, wait a second, you can't make that law. It's against our Constitution. And there should be a president to carry it out and have emergency powers. When you can't ask the legislature, should we go fight back when someone's attacking us? Let the president say, no, emergency. You need all those 3 things. Well, the founding fathers studied Greece and Rome really carefully, and they studied the 18th century Age of Enlightenment. They studied Adam Smith. They got to the publisher of Adam Smith before his Wealth of Nations came out. Says, we want the first chapters right now because we're putting our Constitution together. Our Constitution is a 1-page document. Go to Washington, D.C. and look at it. Just the rules of the road. Don't drive faster than 65 miles an hour. That's all it says. And we don't know what we have. We're taking it for granted, and we're talking about it as if it doesn't exist. Let's expand Let's expand the 10 Commandments. Let's expand the Golden Rule and make it mean whatever we want it to mean at any time. And we're going in the direction of multiculturalism. U.S. Constitution and British and American democracy and that culture, that's only one approach to life. That's so wrong. We have nothing to unite the nation. Students are not learning the same thing. They're not being taught to be proud or read stuff that would make them proud of being Americans. They're not reading Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America. He says, get rid of slavery, you idiots. But then after that, you're going to be the greatest, 1835, you're going to be the greatest nation the world has ever seen if you keep it up, a responsible, independent citizenry. The French education minister came on, I'm not sure on television or in all the great papers, he says, France, do not look at America with their multiculturalism. In France, we teach French history, French culture. We unite all French citizens. It creates automatically a little patriotism. Wherever a French person is in France or in the world, they can talk to each other. They have the same education, and they're proud of their country. Americans are just talking about bashing their country in public schools. Little students coming home crying. In San Francisco, there was an incident. A student came home and asked their parents, "Did America do anything good?" That's where we are. So I'm saying wrong, wrong, wrong. And the founding fathers are right, right, right. Not
politically. No, I hear you.
Correct, correct.
Yes. So great. Well, I have a couple of follow-up questions for you. I personally agree. It's so important. I just want to drop in a word for those who are joining us midstream here. If you're watching or listening, this is a San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin, journalist, asking the questions, and David Parker, author of Income and Wealth, a San Francisco Conservative, and the new book of essays, Rome 476. This is certainly one of the thought-provoking conversations I always talk about that our series is known for. If you're watching this on YouTube, I hope you'll hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. But David, going back, I know some teachers, and you're a lifelong educator, as we know, some teachers kind of use that approach of, well, what's the worst that can happen? If we go down this path, here's what might happen. And you know me, I love politics and kind of the news of the day. That's been my life. And so often when some journalists are talking about, hey, what happened at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 2 years ago, they say, if it continues along this path, what's at risk is the loss of democracy. It's more fragile than you might think. I was just wondering, from your perspective, what's at stake if people don't learn the importance of these texts that Jefferson and the founding fathers learned, and so on. And also, I think back to again, the proper role of the Supreme Court. Suddenly they're making decisions about science and biology when life begins. We're asking our Congress to make certain life decisions. I mean, again, you mentioned some of the curriculum that are making some young students feel bad or guilty for something they did not do. But what's at stake here if we don't appreciate the classics?
Return to the Middle Ages. That's what's at stake. The Rome fell. We're not going to fall. But if you want to see an example of a culture and a society that stood still when it went the opposite direction, you can look at Cuba. The newest car on the road is a 1959 Chevrolet. They stopped cold. Yeah, that's the risk. F.A. Hayek is a Nobel economist. His famous book that probably brought down the Soviet Union, it was being smuggled, is called The Road to Serfdom. If you don't have a free society and people owning their own property, your society is going to go backwards. And Russia doesn't produce a single thing then or now. And Cuba doesn't produce a single thing then.
And I know in your books, as I said, one of the great qualities that I love about your books is that historical perspective. And you write about the French Revolution. You write about the early days of Russia and the czars and Stalin and so on. So again, if we just have this, I don't know if myopic is the right word, but if we're just looking at our own culture today and not looking outside our borders, not looking to historical examples such as the fall of Rome, what are you trying to wake your readers up to about?
Well, our founding fathers did. So they did it for us. Just stick to the Constitution, a literal interpretation, which is not a conservative thing. We literally accept the 10 Commandments. We're not arguing over the 10 Commandments. We don't argue over the Constitution. It's just says set up three houses of government and let the citizens vote. And anything that the federal government isn't doing, the states will do. You don't ask the Supreme Court to decide when a fetus is viable. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. They're not scientists. And anyway, that's personal philosophy. It's not for the Supreme Court to decide. I have a chapter in my new book, Rome, 476. I quote from Jerry Brown when he ran for president in 1976, I believe. City Lights Books, of all companies, published it. I couldn't believe it. He's like me now, a libertarian then. He says, don't look for government to solve all your problems. It can't. Stop doing that. Stop. Yeah, that's his big message. Government can't solve all problems. And I'm saying, I'm adding that all problems are really personal. You didn't get up in the morning and you didn't go to work. Parents are they want their children fed in school for breakfast. You can't give them a bowl of cereal. It's a very irresponsible citizenry we have today, unlike what we had for the first 150 years of our existence. 1933, we flipped it. We become a European socialist. The government does. We think in terms of the government solving our problems. That's a huge flip. And we're going to go down the road to serfdom.
When sort of along those lines, this might be going off on a tangent a little bit, but I know I've heard you say, again, that the role of parents is very important. Like, don't assume your child will get all needed meals at school. But I was speaking to somebody the other day who works with parents of young children who have dyslexia. And I was thinking back to what you've said about the importance of a strong vocabulary at those earliest ages. You worked with young children for 40 plus years. Why is education at that level so important?
Actually, I'm making almost an opposite point. I'm saying that all learning occurs between the age of 0 or maybe 3 months before you're born, 0 to 3. And if you missed it, you missed it. You're probably not going to make it. So we can just close all the schools that are catering to people who missed that period. Can't do it. You have students children coming to school in kindergarten with a 2,500 to 4,500 or 2,500 to 4,500 word deficit, beginning in kindergarten and increasing through the 12th grade. Can't make up for that. Parents have to talk to their children when they're young, read to them, ask them questions, make them respond. Go to the refrigerator with your child. Well, let's look what we got. What is that? Milk. That's right. That's milk. Just talk and make your kids think. And then when you talk to them, don't talk down to them. Talk like we're talking. Children know much more than we think they know. They act age appropriately. They act silly. I have 4 grandchildren. They're running around. And every once in a while, they'll point to me, Poppy, you're this, or you're that. I go, whoa. That's like that was an adult evaluation of who I am. Perfect. Yep. And as a school teacher for 40 years, young children, always amazed at how much they know. And so easy to be thrown off by their childish behavior, because when you're a child, you're a child. That's what it means. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We just have about a minute or two left, and I'd love to, I know maybe we're shifting gears a little bit, but it certainly is about education and inspiring very young people, young children to, rise to the occasion to, make that effort, because that's how they learn. I love what you were telling us recently about, again, teaching your grandchildren how to play the piano. Could you share that story with people listening and watching?
Well, that's just an example where I think of good teaching. And when I was a teacher, I was a very good teacher. And of low-income students, I had them playing at a much higher level than other teachers were doing, partially by good teaching, but mostly by inspiring the students to practice, to be honest. That's what a teacher does. You inspire students. And if you have some good diagnostic skills, you figure out why a student didn't grasp something. Well, say it in a different way, or act it out, or draw it, or people learn. Teachers should pick that up real quick and then present the material over and over until they get it. But my grandson, I didn't want to say, you're taking piano lessons now. No, he started to bang on the piano, bam, 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 bam. I wrote it down. Here, this is what you just played. Okay, bam, 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 bam. Give me more, give me more. So I kept writing down, but had almost a little book of all the stuff he did. And then little by little, it says, between this bam and that bam, curve your fingers correctly and lift your fingers and play those 2 notes exactly right. Then you can go bang, bang, bam again. And pretty soon, play those 4 notes. Pretty soon, play those 10 notes exactly right. Pretty soon, he's playing exactly right. He didn't know he was being taught. So that's an example of good teaching.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. So I think we're out of time for this conversation, but this has, I think, been one of my favorite conversations that we've had about education, as a parent myself, that's so important. So again, I just want to remind everyone if you want to learn more about David's writings and about his books and purchase copies of his books, you can visit his website, davidparkeressays.com. You can also purchase copies of his books, Income and Wealth, A San Francisco Conservative, and his new book of essays, Rome 476, through Amazon. David, in closing, is there anything you'd like to say about your writing and your books?
Well, I'll say something that you said nicely, that my writing gives examples from the ancient past, the best of the ancients past. And I'm saying it from a perspective of somebody who's entrepreneurial, a business person. I'm not saying it from the perspective of someone who's an academic. So my writings read so much differently. They actually ring true, in my opinion. I'm a person in the field doing very big deals in real estate. And so when I write scholarly writing, it comes through in my writing. I give examples from business and from the past. Those are my examples, and they're appealing, and they should hold your attention if you read my books. They're thought-provoking, my books.
Absolutely. And I feel that we're at a pivotal time in America's history. And so I think it's more important than ever that people read your writing, because it has that wonderful quality. It's so important.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for your time, and look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thank you, Tom. Have a nice day.
You.
As we say in California.
Thanks, sir. Thank you.